Now, here's what this monumental vote unfortunately doesn't change, right? Insurance companies, they're not freezing any of the landlord's premiums. The city more than likely is not going to freeze property taxes. Contractors, they're not going to freeze their labor rates, right? The utility companies don't freeze their prices. Nothing else was frozen, only the rent. And that's where this policy starts becoming dangerous. Let's put this a different way. Imagine if your employer froze your salary for 2 years while inflation keeps increasing. Would you feel financially healthier? Probably not, right? That's exactly what's happening to a building. Revenue stays flat, expenses keep climbing, and eventually something has to give. New York's Rent Guidelines Board voted 7-1 to freeze rents for roughly 1 million rent stabilized apartments beginning this fall. And I think this is a huge mistake. So I'm a landlord here in the city of Detroit. I develop apartments, I own apartments, and I actually agree with one thing most everybody is saying. Housing has become way too expensive. Rent has gone up, insurance has gone up, property taxes have gone up, construction costs have exploded, interest rates have skyrocketed, right? Working families are getting squeezed from every direction. So no, this isn't going to be one of those videos where I tell tenants to just simply pay more. No, I understand why folks are frustrated. Where I disagree is how politicians are trying to solve this problem, because here's the uncomfortable truth. There's a difference between making housing cheaper and simply making tenants pay less. Those sound similar, but they're not.
And tenants celebrate after a vote tonight to freeze the rent. Good evening. I'm Christine Johnson. That decision impacts about 2 million New Yorkers who live in rent-stabilized apartments. The board took action to freeze 1- and 2-year leases, something the panel has never done before. But as Andrew Ramos reports, some say it could have long-term repercussions.
The motion passes.
An auditorium packed with tenants erupts in a thunderous applause at El Museo del Barrio in East Harlem. Following a historic vote to freeze rent for nearly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments, the city's Rent Guidelines Board delivered the 7-1 vote Thursday night, which will grant a rent freeze for 1 year and 2-year leases.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of these types of stories are framed landlords versus tenants, good guys versus bad guys, greedy owners versus struggling renters. And in some scenarios, that is the case, but not all, right? Not most, right? I don't think that's the real story here either. The real story is that housing costs money always, whether it's public housing, affordable housing, luxury housing, or even the apartment building down the street, somebody pays. The real question isn't whether housing should be affordable. I think it absolutely should. The real question, though, is who absorbs the rising operating costs when government freezes the revenue, because those costs don't magically disappear. Before anybody starts to call me a greedy landlord in the comments, let me tell you something. If I could wave a magic wand tomorrow and make housing 30% cheaper to build and operate, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Why? Because I'd be able to build more apartments, charge lower rents, qualify for more financing, right? House more people, right? That's my mission as a developer. That's the difference between lowering the cost of housing and simply lowering the price tenants pay. Those are two completely different conversations.
Tenants say it's a game changer in the fight to keep New York affordable.
Oh my goodness, I'm ecstatic. I'm literally walking on cloud 9 right now.
I'm so proud of people my age and young people getting together and forming coalitions, because when we do that, we can make an impact.
Shout out to these tenants that were able to mobilize, create coalitions, and actually get something done, right? They were frustrated with what they felt was wrongdoings and challenges from the landlord side and from building ownership. And they felt vulnerable, and they were able to get in front of the politicians and state their case, and they were able to be heard. And that in turn led them to this monumental decision from the politicians here to in turn freeze the rent for 1 to 2 years. Now, here's what this monumental vote unfortunately doesn't change, right? Insurance companies, they're not freezing any of the landlord's premiums. The city more than likely is not going to freeze property taxes. Contractors, they're not going to freeze their labor rates, right? The utility companies don't freeze their prices. Nothing else was frozen, only the rent. And that's where this policy starts becoming dangerous. Let's put this a different way. Imagine if your employer froze your salary for 2 years while inflation keeps increasing. Would you feel financially healthier? Probably not, right? That's exactly what's happening to a building. revenue stays flat, expenses keep climbing, and eventually something has to give.
The final vote, which came after more than a dozen public hearings and multiple data reports, was a punch in the gut for property owners who say they are already struggling to maintain their buildings.
We'll have to lay off some of the supers. Only choice. It's a business. People don't get it.
Housing has costs, and this has become a political game.
Now, let's be fair here. Not every landlord in New York is struggling. Some own buildings free and clear. Some have enormous portfolios. Some are doing incredibly well, but that's not everybody. Thousands of landlords own one apartment building, maybe two. Many are basically trying to maintain buildings that are 50, 70, or even 100 years old. But here's something I've learned as a landlord. Buildings don't care about politics. The boiler doesn't know there was a rent freeze, right? The roof doesn't care who won the election. I've never had a contractor tell me, hey, look, Eddy, since rents got frozen, we're going to charge you less, right? It does not happen, right? These contractors need to get paid what they're worth, right? Repairs don't wait until cash flow improves. They happen when they happen. And if you don't fix them, your tenants suffer.
Mayor Mamdani, who made freezing rent a centerpiece of his mayoral campaign, now fulfills a campaign promise. In a statement, the mayor said in part, "This is the relief that working people across our city deserve." Thursday's vote came amid some controversy where Christina Smith, a member of the city's Rent Guidelines Board who represented landlords, resigned from her post. She suggested that the vote's outcome was already decided by the board, where 6 of the 9 members were appointed by Mayor Mamdani. But the mayor insists the RGB is independent.
This is where I think housing becomes politics instead of economics. Politicians love immediate wins. Freeze rents, instant applause, right? Ribbon cutting, press conference, headline. But building new housing, that takes years. Nobody gets a standing ovation for reducing permitting times. Nobody celebrates zoning reform. Nobody cheers for improving construction financing. Those things aren't politically exciting, but they're exactly what create affordable housing over the long run. Housing policy shouldn't be focused around how do we lower next year's rent. It should also focus around, will this building still be in good condition 20 years from now?
While the vote may be popular with tenants, experts say the long-term impact may cause more problems than solve them.
We have a housing crisis, not just a rent crisis, but we're going to have a housing supply crisis as well. And that may only get worse if we don't find ways to keep these buildings standing and operating in a decent condition.
Listen, we don't just have a rent problem, we have a supply problem. Think about this for a second. Freezing rent doesn't build one apartment, not one, right? It doesn't pour concrete, it doesn't install plumbing, it doesn't frame walls, it doesn't make banks more willing to finance projects. It simply just temporarily changes what existing tenants pay. That's why I keep saying politicians are treating the symptom instead of the disease. But why aren't enough apartments getting built to in turn help with the housing crisis that we're currently in? Well, construction costs, interest rates, insurance, labor shortages, permitting delays, environmental reviews, financing requirements, developer risks, right? These are the real barriers. And until we address those, housing will remain expensive. But I have to disagree with this rent freeze, not because I think landlords deserve unlimited rent increases, not because I think tenants should just figure it out, and not because I don't believe affordability is a crisis. I absolutely do. I disagree because this policy confuses price with costs. Lowering what tenants pay doesn't lower what housing costs to own and operate. And if we don't lower the actual cost of providing housing, we're eventually going to see deferred maintenance, less investment, harder financing, and fewer apartments getting built. And what's ironic is all of those things make housing more expensive over time. Now, if I were making housing policy, I'd actually spend less time trying to control the prices and more time reducing the costs of creating housing. Because if housing becomes cheaper to provide, it naturally becomes easier to make affordable. All right, so here's what worries me the most. A rent freeze feels good today, no doubt about it, but housing isn't a 1-year business, it's a 50-year business. The decisions that we make today determine what these buildings look like decades from now. And as a landlord, I want my tenants to have affordable housing. I also want them to be living in a safe, well-maintained, financially sustainable building, right? Those goals shouldn't compete with one another. Good housing policy should accomplish both. This is a question for my landlords, right? How have rising costs affected your property over the past few years? Let's have a real conversation in the comments. I would love for individuals to actually see, hear, and talk with landlords and building owners in order for you to understand the challenges that we're facing on a daily basis, because housing is too important to reduce to simple political slogans. Thanks for chiming in and listening to me ramble. I do have a Patreon community. Link is in the description below. Would love to welcome you over there as well. We talk real estate, we talk entrepreneurship, and I'll see you in the next video.